Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hack Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode I'm talking to Alanah Herron. She's the talent acquisition specialist at CarTrawler, where she's responsible for managing and owning the recruitment process from end to end. Previously she's worked in recruitment for Ralph Lauren, also in talent acquisition. As always, I'll put links to things we talk about and CarTrawler in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Alanah.
Thanks, Matthew. Thank you very much for having me.
No problem at all. As the listeners might have picked up from my Irish accent, you actually are from Ireland. So I understand the Irish school system is slightly different to what I'm used to in the UK here. And I've spoken to a few Americans. So what's it like going to school in Ireland?
I would say, in fairness, I think Ireland has a really excellent education system. Maybe take a slightly different lens if we look at it through like a neurodiversity perspective, which I think is, very nuanced and quite recent in the last 10 to 15 years. But overall, I would say, we're very renowned, particularly in Europe, for having quite a strong kind of curriculum, and there's a high degree of opportunity. It's definitely something that I think is being consistently reviewed. So probably not dissimilar to yourself. So you've got your GCSE and your A levels. So we would have a junior cert, which is the equivalent, and then your A levels would be our leaving cert. I suppose the main difference is the amount of subjects. So most leaving certs will take anywhere from 6 up to 9 subjects.
Blimey, that's a few.
And so it is a lot. So, I think in terms of kind of future improvements in this particular area, I know one of the things that they're currently looking at is around kind of consistent assessment rather than entire results and, future outcomes being based on the results of one exam set at the same time every year over a series of 10 days. And just to give you a flavour of that, you're talking 2 subjects of exams per day over 10 days. So it's critical pressure. And isn't really designed to really show the full strengths of people. It's really determining everything on how it goes for you on that one day. So I'm sure there are many Irish people that would agree with me that there's definitely need for us to relook at this through various different lenses.
Yeah. So that's a lot of subjects, as you said earlier, that you're studying for one. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because some people hate exams and some people go up like a grade. Their predicted grade is a B, say, in the English system, and they hit an A because they're just awesome under pressure. And it almost doesn't feel fair sometimes, does it?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So you're saying about the multitude of subjects. So let me see, compared to what I'm used to, show my age now, how long I left school. So it's 6 GCSEs. So do you think the Irish system is like you've got more subjects and you still have to learn to the same level, or is it more of a broader range of subjects, you have a wider knowledge but less specialism in each one?
I would say it's a bit of a, see all of the above. I think that honestly, it's a real combination, because obviously the amount of subjects that we have to cover off, and yes, the standard is to the same high level and expertise in both. But there is that saying where, you can be was a master in some things and
jack of all, master of none.
That's exactly it. So, naturally, I think for anyone, do you know what I mean? If you have a preference over some subjects than others, but, traditionally you're taking on one science. You've got your maths, your English. We also do Irish as well.
Of course, yes.
You generally will also then have either a business or accounting. You could have economics. You could also then, this is, again, another area for improvement, but some subjects are only limited to, say, accessibility within all boys schools. So the likes of woodwork or technical work can only be done there.
Okay.
There is, then obviously you can take on history, geography. So people generally take at least one science, one general, and one business. Or you could do something like arts and music, and that could also be an additional. Not to mention if you want to take on a multitude of subjects, or if you want to take on additional languages. In fact, I forgot to mention a language. There's always a foreign language included as well.
So you're learning effectively 3 languages, English, Irish, and a modern language.
Absolutely. Yeah. So very, very broad in that way. And it doesn't really kind of, even though they would say, okay, you reduce it, it's actually more when you're at junior cert. So in junior cert, you learn all subjects. So you're doing everything. Whereas when you get to leaving cert, you are selecting it down to traditionally 6 or 7, but that's still a high amount. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a fair effort. Yeah. Yeah. Looks good on a UCAS form when you're trying to apply for uni, I imagine.
Well, this is it. And I suppose, like, again, everything here is like, I don't know how it works in the UK. I'm not as familiar. I know that you kind of have a general sort of overall score based on 3 subjects, as I understand it. But here it's done on a point system. So each sort of score, A, B, C, is equivalent to X amount of points, which then you tot up your entire piece to give you your total. And then the courses within Irish universities are then have entrance based on X amount of points being achieved in the Leaving Cert.
Yes, I think they still do UCAS points over here, and it does tot up. But I think the big 3 maths English science might be weighted heavy, but I'm out of date on that. So I'll put some links in the show notes to what it is now for anybody who wants to have a look-see, take a deep dive. Okay, so just that's kind of the context. The whole thing is it's really interesting hearing how different school systems work around the world. Now, at what point along your educational journey, or was it afterwards, that you found out you were dyslexic?
So I came to it quite late in life as such. So I was 15 when I was first diagnosed.
Oh, okay.
So this was the year before my junior cert, the GCSE equivalent.
Yep.
And like, that's a long time to have gone through school. Like, bear in mind, that would have been 6 years in primary school up to nearly 3 years in secondary. And I was always a kid who kind of did my best with her homework, but never quite got the result that I was looking for. Like, the effort I would put in would never result in the output as such.
Yeah.
So that always kind of created, I suppose, just a bit of disinterest at times, just a lack of motivation. And also just, I suppose, just sadness in general. Do you know what I mean? Never understanding why I couldn't quite get what I wanted out of it. But it wasn't until, as I said, I got to second year and I had this fabulous English teacher. Her name was Mrs. Mulligan. And she was my English teacher really since day dot in secondary school. And I always had such a fondness for her and we got on very well. But I remember there was a period there when we were kind of getting ready for kind of mock exams, which were like the prep exams for the junior cert.
Yeah. Okay.
Wasn't quite getting the results. And, we were studying various things. Like, I remember at the time we were studying the novel Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. And, I was really enjoying it. And you would have then, as part of your exam, you would have to write essays and comparative essays. And we were obviously practicing this throughout the year in terms of getting ready for the exams. And there was a few times that we would, have a chat after class and we would be discussing the book or discussing what we were talking about in class, because I loved English. That was the irony of it, is that was my favourite subject. And she was my favourite teacher.
Right,
so it was never a hardship for me. But after about a couple of times of having this kind of conversation where we were discussing what we were talking about in class, was when she became very honest with me and said, okay, so you kind of solved what I've been wondering here, because I wasn't sure based on your homework whether or not A, were you paying attention in class, or B, were you in fact doing your homework? Because what I'm seeing in your written work is not how you're verbally describing it to me. And it was at that moment she said, I think we should look to get you assessed for dyslexia because I think you might have it.
Okay. And talk me through some of the assessment process, because I know a lot about UK system.
Well, in fairness, obviously this was news to my parents and stuff. My mom, reflecting back, my mother has often kind of remembered certain aspects where, when she was reading with me as a child and we would read a sentence together, when you're doing kind of like primary school homework. And we would have to read the same sentence again, but the same word I was stuck on the first time. It was like my short-term memory recall hadn't retained it, even though we just discussed it. Mm-hmm. So only now she can look back on that and kind of go, okay, it was there, but there was just such a lack of awareness of dyslexia. You know what I mean? I don't think we could have gotten there at that point ourselves. But luckily, Mrs. Mulligan was well on the ball. So what she did was she actually organised it with the Board of Education to have someone come down as part of that organisation and conducting an assessment in school. So we didn't have to look for external supports. It was all done for us in the school, and for that I've always been very grateful. The process, as I remember it, because it was over 15 years ago, essentially, you put them through a series of kind of tests, obviously kind of looking at kind of various aspects of kind of cognitive assessment and abstract visual reasoning and all that, aspect of it. And, we got the report back. It said I was dyslexic. But what I find interesting now is that I've actually in my lifetime had 2 assessments. So this was my first experience in school. And that was very much through a deficit-focused model. I can now see that looking back on it. Yeah. Because although it said, yes, Alanah is, has dyslexia, has being the, phrasing of it, but also that, how it was relayed back to me was essentially, you'll probably find it incredibly difficult to attend university. Certain jobs could become very difficult for you. We might need to limit your expectations on what it is that you're going to achieve. And that was how the information was relayed to us. It was very much, as I said, through that deficit focus. You know what I mean? There was never a discussion over what an advantage this could be.
Yeah, how motivating, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting now is that I can reflect back on that, and I really do think it informed potentially what I put into the next 3 years of school. You know, because when that is how this is explained to you, you're very much, I suppose you're only going to put in your effort where you feel it's necessary. There was I think what it did, although it made me aware of something that's very important about myself, it also demotivated me and probably, really altered a lot of the things I would have went after or potential that I could have had in the next 3 years.
Is it that magic phrase appears in your head, I can't because I'm dyslexic?
Well, that's it exactly. You know what I mean? Yeah. And also you have to remember that the setting, you're being told this by an assessor, by a teacher, people who are in a position to really frame this to you. And again, that was the model. That is still the model in some cases, especially in, the education system and particularly in the Irish HSE. A lot of this is still very much through that deficit-focused model and isn't focused on strengths or preferences or building strategies. It's still very, very much in the negative aspect.
Yeah, and that's hard work then, isn't it? Because one of the things talk a lot about across various episodes of this podcast is that deficit thinking that takes a long time to shake off, doesn't it? But I mean, I knew I was dyslexic 6. I spent the whole school system, and to be honest, till I was mid-30s, thinking it was a huge deficit. So a nice sort of 20-year career of thinking it's a huge deficit, and actually losing that thinking and realizing that it's a different way of thinking that has strengths as well as some potential downsides, if you want to look at it like that. How much things take off once you've embraced that sort of way of looking at it.
Absolutely. And that's what I found to be so freeing as well, to be totally honest with you. So rolling forward 15 years later, I had left Ralph Lauren. It was just unfortunately a casualty of COVID at the time in terms of our team. We wrapped up there towards the end of December 2020. So at the start of January of the following year, I just felt that, maybe it's time to actually lose this mindset. And I kind of wanted to just reinvest in myself. And it was such a big leap for me to decide to go back into education. Do you know what I mean? Because you're trying to lose that mindset. But I knew one thing life had taught me at that stage was that I wasn't going to not ask for help this time. I was going to make sure that I got the supports I needed to unlock the potential that I believed I may have had at that time. Yeah. So I did an initial kind of diploma in UCD or in HR management, and then I went on, and I'm still in the CIPD kind of training for, I'm working towards my HR degree, which I'll be doing next year.
Okay, yeah.
The second assessment came around that time, because the irony again of some of the systems is that my original report no longer exists.
Oh, helpful.
So helpful.
Yeah, great.
And obviously that's down to like GDPR and various aspects of that, but that was the case. So I had to be reassessed. So I found it to be a bit of I wasn't too happy about it initially. I felt like, well, I'm paying money for have someone to tell me exactly what I already know. But sure, look, if this is what gets me an updated report and will allow me the access through my college to get that additional support and get those strategies in place for me. I'm not even sure exactly what it was that I would need, just knowing that, the help would be available. Then I was willing to do it. But what it unlocked was incredible, because I had been introduced to the term neurodiversity quite, within that year, just through personal circumstances in my family. But going through an assessment for dyslexia through a neuroaffirmative approach 15 years later was completely different. You know what I mean? The idea of neurodiversity, just being that this is a neurological diversity within the human species, in the same way that we have diversity in our height, in our agility, in our athleticism, in our personalities. And, really recognizing that it's that whole is greater than the sum of its parts feature to humanity. And that the world is essentially just made up of a balance of kind of specialists and generalists across a varying number of forms, and recognizing that this is really what society is. And like, some people are going to be jacks of all trades, and they're going to be equally good at verbal skills and visual reasoning, abstract reasoning, memory and processing speed. That's about, 2/3 of the human population will be average in all measures of kind of neurocognitive ability. But then realizing that some of us, like me, are specialists. We're absolutely excellent at abstract visual reasoning and really, really rubbish at processing speed. So, the world is essentially just made up of varying different spiky profiles, and to have that assessment through that neuroaffirmative lens, and then being able to recognize that there's so much strengths associated with being dyslexic, and then being able to really take that into my daily work and apply strategies in terms of how I can process information and how to get my best work across the line. It's amazing that 15 years in the difference from an original assessment that was so deficit focused to a neuroaffirmative one, how different those perspectives and that they are.
Yes, definitely. So let's take a deep dive into the phase of life between your first assessment and your second. Now, obviously, you're still in education at that point as a 15-year-old. What kind of, I guess getting the deficit thinking in means you don't necessarily embrace being dyslexic, but was there any kind of strategies, tools, or things you were trying to do or being offered at the time to help you with it? Or was it the extra time in exams is the main thing you took?
The extra time in exams was certainly offered to me. I also had a spelling waiver over my exam as well. So that was obviously hugely helpful.
Yeah. Was that a sticker that went on the paper? I seem to remember something similar where you had to stick the front of the paper.
Ours was a stamp, but
that's it.
That. And that was great, you know what I mean? And just to, say I got an A in English, I often wondered the spelling waiver certainly helped. There was certainly resourcing classes and stuff, but I wouldn't say that they really gave us any additional strategies or really kind of showcased the preferences. It was really just, again, more time being given to extra subjects. It wasn't really helping you in terms of how to apply your way of learning as such. Sort of.
Yeah, it sometimes feels, and I'm sure my memory's hazy on this, and I've probably forgotten some of the good strategies people get. But the extra time in exam, maybe some colour filters, and the odd lesson, an hour a week or 2 hours a week out doing extra lessons was kind of what I remember. And apologies to some of them people who helped me at the time. I'm probably doing them a little bit of a disservice. So you would have finished your schooling and then gone straight in the workforce rather than doing any sort of heavier higher education?
I did a beautician's course because, again, taking the advice of the model I was given that, far better to work with my hands. So I did do that course as well. And I really enjoyed it. But I knew kind of midway in that this probably wasn't the industry that I wanted to stay in. It was good. I was glad to do it. But what actually happened was I had taken a part-time job with H&M in and around that same time. And it was during that year, I became, got full-time hours in the summer. By the end of that time, I was made sort of permanent. And then, I was on the track to supervisor. And I just fell in love with the world of retail. And that was my next 11 years with H&M.
Ah, okay. Wow. I just worked your way up the ladder with H&M.
Yeah, essentially. And I have to say, they're H&M back in the early noughties. So we're talking kind of 2005, 2010. Some of the best HR professionals I came across during that time. I can think of a number of people who were really influential for me during that during that time period, and the investment that they made into training in particular. And there's things that I learned during that time that I still apply today. Do you know what I mean? And it was the kind of environment where it was lean, it was dynamic, it was very fast paced. But it was a real comrade in arms environment. You know what I mean? If you were in it, you loved it and you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And when people have long careers in retail, I get it. It's a vocation to a certain degree. And certainly that was, I look back on that 11 years just with such gratitude and real fondness, and the relationships I had and friendships I made, it was really impactful. And as I said, still can reflect on that today.
No, that's cool. And were you still not embracing dyslexia at this point? So were you doing any strategies in the workplace, or were you just not telling anybody and hoping that they didn't work it out? Because you're in a HR kind of function. So in my mind, they'd be more switched on to it than maybe another function in the company. But
well, there's some things I think when you're working in retail management in particular, the thing that I've always found was a natural strength of mine was working with and through people. So, that really, I think, served me well. And there were some aspects of the role that I really enjoyed. I would be the person that could get really hyper-focused and into the detail of, how we're making money and the commercial aspect of it, and, the organizational aspect of it as well. Do you know what I mean? And that skill to be able to be so agile in such a lean environment. And, so there was a lot of things that I think was just down to the physicality of the role and the demand of it. And that was where I felt I could apply my best skills. And I think that's what carried me through. It's interesting that dyslexia, I don't think I actually really ever told anyone. It was beyond my, I suppose I wouldn't have had a good impression of it at the time. So I wouldn't have been in a place to share it. And even if I would have told anyone, and if I did, and I'm just not remembering, I probably would have, made excuses for it or tried to overcompensate in some way. And I think a lot of the time when you're not embracing it, you do end up in a state of overcompensation.
Yes, I think so.
So you kind of lean into what you can do and stay away from the things that you're worried are not going to come across as well.
Yes, definitely. I think that's, really, really double down on everything that you can do and try and avoid everything else, or hope that you're so good at them things that nobody notices the bits that you're in your head you're really rubbish at.
Yeah, it was interesting. We didn't have email, which is mad when I think about it. But there wasn't actually email. When we would have faxed the head office.
So,
email was introduced very late. I'd say my last year and a half there, and it was interesting. I remember that being a real kind of oh God, now I'm going to have to communicate in writing, because normally when you're communicating with the head office, you're giving updates and teams, and it's all over the phone, it's all in person. You know what I mean? So it's interesting how some things became different sort of nervous barriers. But that's the only time I remember kind of having to really concentrate or think. Everything else kind of came quite naturally. And I had amazing colleagues in a team. It was such a good time.
Yes, and I guess that's a good thing about having good colleagues, which I assume would build a diverse team in your case, that your strengths dovetail in with their strengths. So everybody moves the project forwards rather than having to kind of think, oh my God, hang on.
But it's funny because I remember we had this really great visual merchandiser who worked for us. And, the thing about being a department manager and a visual merchandiser is that you're usually at odds with each other in that.
Okay.
And by that, I mean, he would look at things through very much a very visual aspect, and he would be able to see how to build the trend and the flow and the color coordination and the different sort of sections and styles. And I would always say to him, great, because I can't see it. Like, I could tell you that rack of dresses right there made us double the money last week, and that's why I think they need to be in the front of the shop. So like, we used to kill each other, but in like the nicest way, like in a real kind of, as I said, comrade in arms sort of environment. But like, that was where I showed the strength. I would be the person that could rip down a wall and put it back together again. Just don't ask me to make it look pretty, because that's never my skill. So you kind of knew where your strengths were and where they stopped. And when you're with people who just have that naturally.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. It definitely keeps life interesting, things like that, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay. So fast forward then through that Ralph Lauren and then your second assessment that you've had quite recently.
Yeah.
Now, we spoke earlier on about your attitude shift about dyslexia post that assessment, but your kind of day-to-day running of your life and your career through it. What sort of things are you now implementing and putting in place now that you've got a different attitude towards it?
So I think one of the things that I've realized is just putting in kind of safe barriers around me. Because what I've recognized in myself, and I'd be interested to know if this is something that you've found with other people who are dyslexic, but in, say, composing any kind of content or writing an email, I will hear a mistake. I won't see it.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's when that post my most recent assessment, and as that was explained to me as a strategy, the second I applied that, I saw a huge difference in my output.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of factors there. So say, for example, and it works in not just composing, but also intake of information, because the other thing I have to recognize is that my short-term memory recall does need more support. So reading a long-bodied email for me, one of the things that I do is I actually put on the read aloud option, but I read it at the same time as it's being read to me. So what I find that does, it's obviously doubling down from a sensory perspective, and that I'm getting it from an audible point of view, but I'm still visually seeing it. And I've actually found that has created opportunities where it's getting past my short-term memory recall and actually getting to embed faster. And the same thing when I'm composing a long email, I will have it read back to me and I will hear every single mistake. And it's usually in the minute, as it is in most cases. Our brains work far too quickly. And so we will miss the comma S's and we will mix our vowels. And, not to be general, but I know that's what it is for me. But I will hear it immediately. So it's amazing that, and I think that does create that level of confidence as well, because you do know that you certainly know how to compose, and you know how to you know how to communicate in the best possible way. And all these strategies are just a way to bypass the way that you intake or output information. Yes. And
I think you're saying, like, clearly email has been quite new to you anyway. So.
It wasn't when I went to Ralph Lauren. They were quite late to the shop. They were in stores. They had them in corporate. We just didn't need them.
You just didn't need them, right? Yeah. And actually the doubling down with reading along while reading out loud.
Yeah.
Using read out loud on whichever product you're using it can be really, really useful. Particularly now everybody sits in offices with noise cancelling headphones on. You've already got the headphones on anyway.
Yeah. And that's another aspect is the degree of kind of hyper focus as well.
Yeah.
It's just the 10% more effort that you probably have to spend in things that maybe just other people don't.
Mm-hmm. But are you finding that you've got strengths that other people don't have that you can really tap into in terms of sort of your work?
Yeah, I think so. I think the other aspect of, and maybe it's something I'm still discovering, but I find that there's patterns that I can spot that may not always be seen by everyone else. Do you know what I mean? And that's not to say, I think it's more tapping into the creative aspect. I think it's because we have that ability to maybe look at things from the other side of the coin, and we can kind of connect those patterns. And because our brains, do work at that kind of speed, we're just kind of getting there quicker. Do you know what I mean? Or we're seeing something that maybe others don't because they're, also because we may be missing aspects. It just kind of frees our mind to kind of consider more.
Yeah, I think so. And I think quite a lot of people always mention dyslexia pattern recognition as a should we say, competitive advantage when they're at work.
Yeah, I think it is. I certainly think it is.
Okay. So what I want to kind of focus on really is that most of your sort of Ralph Lauren and now at Car Trawler career has been in recruitment. So can you, I'm familiar with recruitment as in trying to get a job. But not too familiar with what necessarily goes on the back end. Yeah. So can we sort of talk about that, and then we sort of weave in a little bit more of your other story into that, I think.
Yeah, my journey to kind of recruitment started all the way back in H&M. So as I mentioned, I knew one of my strengths was around communicating, working with and through people, and getting a good sense of people, I think, as well. I would say that's a strength of mine. So, and I also just really enjoyed it. And again, it was pivotal people you meet along the way. So our area recruiter at the time was a gentleman called Trevor Mannon. And we got on well. And I remember he invited me to come and support him with some recruitment that he was doing for stores. And I really enjoyed it. And I just remember just something shifting that day, going, this is just what I want to do. I find this to be, because it's such I suppose being a manager, being a team member, knowing the environment, I suppose my perspective in that up to that point was valuable in that I could spot talent, and I knew what good looked like, and I knew what the stores needed, and I knew what our culture needed. So it was just using the same sort of strengths I cultivated, but just in a different way. And then over time, that just became the go-to. The thing I would always manage was the recruitment, or have the enjoyment or want to do it. So I would support with different store openings in recruitment and different areas that we were expanding in. I suppose I got to a point, 11 years is a long time to be with any business.
It is a very long time, yes.
It is. And I suppose I had to kind of reckon with the fact that I did want to go into recruitment. I always had a huge interest in HR in particular. Again, very people focused. It made sense for me. And I knew I wanted to do it, but I suppose you just don't know how when that's all you've ever done.
Yeah.
And then I remember at one point, I didn't even have a CV. Isn't that horrendous for a recruiter to admit? But I genuinely didn't. I hadn't needed one, obviously. Yeah, but I remember getting this kind of feeling of I think I might do one up and kind of just see what it could look like. And, at that time, in addition to all the recruitment experience in stores, I was also overseeing all the onboarding, all of the development for staff, really kind of rolling out that side of things. And then one day, this recruiter, her name is Susanna, she reached out to me. And honestly, Matthew, if I could have written my ideal job description, that was what was sent to me. It was recruitment and resource manager for Ralph Lauren.
Yes.
And it was down the road, and it was, instead of one store, it would have been two, and I would have been looking after the whole area, the entire employee population, to which there was, I think, about 150 at that stage. So again, increase in headcount compared to what we had been dealing with. And I remember interviewing for it, just feeling like, this is mine. I just know I can do this. Not to sound like, No. You ever just get it was almost like the universe had just sent it at that stage. I was just there's no way that I could have just imagined this not 5 days ago, and that this lands in my inbox. I was like, I feel like I brought this to myself. Yeah,
it's funny is that you leave some interviews and you just feel the room because you can hear it from the tonality of the hiring managers, can't you? Like when they're like, when can you start? And you're like, this is going well here.
Absolutely. And I remember meeting the area manager at the time. His name is David Lake. And just that instant vibe. But here's the irony of all of it. I walk into the room. I had prepared certain documents and stuff that I thought, this is what I would introduce into the process. This is how I see a best-in-class onboarding. This is how I think, Ralph Lauren can be, the go-to place for starting careers in retail. And it was kind of meeting all this knowledge, do you know what I mean, of knowing how stores actually work, you know what I mean, and having done it for 11 years, and then also having that passion for wanting to find the best possible talent. Yeah, and then we get chatting, and it turns out he had done 15 years in H&M.
15? He trumped you on that then.
He trumped me on 10 years. So his first question to me in the interview for Ralph Lauren, the first interview I'd done in 11 years, was, what's your favorite value in H&M? Which actually just proves my point I made earlier, that it stays with you your whole career. You never lose what they teach you.
Yes. So
that was very interesting and very funny. And I was so grateful I got the role, and I did that for over 4 years, and it was amazing. And it was absolutely like out of the firing pan into the fire. Yeah. You know, it was full on. It was full end-to-end recruitment for both stores, but not just recruitment. It was the onboarding and the induction and training and development, and you name it, I did it. But I found a new community of amazing recruiters as well. And over time, our role then expanded, and we were moved over to the corporate side. And I got to work with our HR director, or our recruitment director at the time, Rebecca, who was fantastic. And I got like my own community again, like my colleague Jonathan and Lorraine, and just all these wonderful people I got to meet. And what we did was, the role changed from me just kind of looking after the 2 initial stores to now I was looking after stores in Scotland, the north of England, and still the Irish stores. So it was
cool.
Great, do you know what I mean, to get that level of expansion. And it was a wonderful 4 years, and I still look back on it very fondly, but it definitely fast-tracked my experience in recruitment in a big way. Yeah.
And then obviously you've had to leave that job because good old COVID come rolling down the road, unfortunately.
Very unfortunately. But then they Cartrawler found me, you know what I mean? And again, this is always a little bit fated as well, which I feel like has been a theme for most of my career. But I was, you know, as I said earlier, I started finished up the work in the January, was very much focused on education, had already begun my courses. And I suppose being a recruiter, you also kind of get very selective over what recruiters you want to reach out to. Like, you get a sense from their LinkedIn post, okay, you know what you're doing. Yeah, and there was this one guy I came across, his name is Gavin, and I just knew instantly. I was like, he looks like a good recruiter. So I reached out to him, and he was the only one I reached out to, and just gave him my CV, my history, what I think I was looking for. We stayed in touch for a few weeks, and then he rings me randomly on a Friday at 10 o'clock. Can you do an interview at 12? Sure can, no problem.
Yeah, no pressure. Yeah.
No pressure. And then I met our now head of talent acquisition and our director of talent management, and they're my team now, and just instant hit off. Do you know what I mean? Just
great.
Knew I was like, I'm really going to enjoy this. There was just a vibe. I just knew that this was where I hoped to be. And it was very quick. We met that Friday. I met our wonderful CPO, Sheila, on the Monday, and I started on the Thursday. So it was incredibly fast.
Oh, nice. That is really cool. So, and it's great that you managed to meet people you really like so instantly, because that really helps with any job, doesn't it? Like, it's just having fun and enjoying the people you're around gets the best out of everyone, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think another testament to the culture of Cartrawler is that, you know, within 3 days, our head of talent acquisition, he was expecting his first baby. His wife went into labour. 3 days with me in the door. And then it was just me and our director for 3 weeks while he, you know, very rightly took paternity leave. But I think that my history of kind of fast-paced, working very dynamic environments, you know, just comrade in arms, getting stuck in, that served me well. Do you know what I mean? And I can take a lot of that there. And that was where I think that 3 weeks was so successful, because I think I was far more useful when he came back, because you just had to get stuck in and start delivering.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure, I don't know if he'd agree, if he'd say it was a perfect onboarding, but it certainly worked. Do you know what I mean? And we've expanded our team since. But I suppose the biggest challenge I would have had was, I was, very comfortable in the retail environment, and even in Ralph Lauren, although the role was far more expanded and was from a regional aspect, I hadn't hired in tech. So that was,
of course, yes,
that had to be the new adjustment. Do you know what I mean? So I often think they probably took a bit of a risk to some degree in terms of when they brought me on, because I wouldn't have been recruiting in that environment. But what I've discovered is that it's really about partnerships in any recruitment process. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I personally like in-house for a few different reasons. A lot of my colleagues came from agencies, and it's a very different environment. I enjoy the aspect of working with a hiring manager and getting a real understanding of not just what role and skill they need to fill, but what type of person, what are they missing from their team, like looking at it from a much more holistic perspective. And if you can get to the bones of that, you can spot that talent, and then you'll learn the technical aspects and what that means to certain degrees over time. So again, I think it's the working with and through people is what served me well during that time.
Yes, definitely. And do you think some of this pattern recognition to spot talents and things like that comes from some of your dyslexic strength?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. I think the ability to, and I can actually say this because it was in both of my assessments, even though 15 years apart, is that a lot of my strength is in how I communicate verbally.
Okay, yeah.
So therefore, I think that aspect has served me well, and I can, as my mother always said, I can talk to anyone. I go out of my way to make people comfortable. I'm also, and I think this is also a very common trait with people who are dyslexic or neurodivergent in general, highly empathetic.
Yeah.
So I think there's that translation of knowing where the other person is sitting. And, I've never taken for granted in any of my jobs, in any recruitment I've done, you never know how important this job is to that person. You could be the 7th recruiter they've met. You could be the only call they've gotten back. And it's never taken for granted that how much of a positive impact this could make on that person's life. And I certainly will always look back on myself and go, my life now and all the things in it are only made possible because of the opportunities I was given and how I've been able to leverage those strengths throughout, and the importance of a job and what that can do for people's lives. So I think I've never lost the core aspect of what it's really about. I think when you become, and this goes back to my point on agencies, no offense to any agencies or recruiters listening, all due respect, you're fantastic at what you do. But when you bring in KPIs and kind of very strict measurements, comes down to how many CVs have you reviewed, and you get down to that nitty gritty, you lose the humanity in what it is you're trying to do, or you can become too focused on the business needs. And while that's incredibly important, and you have to balance expectations and the needs of the business, and you have to make difficult calls and decisions, and that's all part of it, you can never forget the respect aspect for the people that's there. So I whether that's related to dyslexia or whether that's life experience, but I certainly think it's the empathy aspect that comes through.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a blend of both there. I think some of the dyslexia strengths come in there, and as you say, the empathy is likely to come from a bit of life experience as well. One thing I wanted to kind of curious to ask you about, and feel free to stop me and we can just cut this bit, but the recruitment process for a dyslexic person. Now, I've done a fair bit of job application recently for circumstances in my own life that some companies seem to do a really good job of not having, like, I find it quite prohibitive if somebody's like, in 600 words or less, explain why you want to work for this company. And then you're going down the next page and run out of steam. And then other ones, they're fairly straightforward. How do you feel recruitment is for somebody who's neurodiverse, particularly a dyslexic person? And I know it varies from company to company.
It does. I would say that, like with most areas of diversity and inclusion, and neurodiversity is just one of those, that we're at the beginning of a very interesting time in history in terms of the awareness and understanding, and therefore the actions that will be put in place in terms of that. The word that came across recently that we usually hear is reasonable accommodations. Do you know what I mean? Which is, it's fine in its essence. But we've recently updated ours to success enablers.
Okay, yeah. Right.
So I think it's about in terms of how you're framing it, and I think that's the first thing. It's in addition to having like an equality, diversity, and inclusion statement as a business, I think it's also important to recognise what support are you going to offer in terms of a recruitment process. So therefore, we have an active email that goes directly to our team if anyone would like any additional assistance. But I think there is a potential in a recruitment across the board that there does need to be more awareness and a potential kind of leveling of the playing field. Mm-hmm. Some of the things I kind of consider about this would be kind of like if I was to like de-bias recruitment processes, you know what I mean? If I was ever given such an opportunity, and I think we will over time, and we will see this adopt over the next 10 years. I think the first thing is around kind of job adverts. So we need to kind of really take a scissors to these. Like the first thing is around kind of inclusive language. So yes. We need to consider that from a gender aspect. We need to consider it from, not using too much corporate cliche. We've brought in technology like Texio that can help us review all of that and spot areas for improvement. But to go a bit deeper in terms of the lens of dyslexia, you're looking at job adverts that can be very lengthy, potentially difficult to read. So there really is a need for kind of that audit and review. And, are we using very clear and concise language? Is there significant details such as working hours and salaries? What is the format? Are we using too much ambiguous language? You know what I mean? Is it too much of a lengthy wish list? When we think of things like communication skills is often so used, but, that may actually put off somebody in terms of applying. So you have to consider the unconscious bias that may be coming across in job adverts. I think also checking like the likes of career pages and just kind of like really kind of displaying what are what other supports are we going to offer you? Do you know what I mean? And how will you be embraced and be able to bring your full self to work and be proud of any neurodivergence that you may have.
Yeah.
And I think, again, the adopting of kind of how working environments, because the recruitment process is certainly a huge aspect of what needs to be reviewed, but we also need to look at the full employee life cycle. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But focusing on recruitment, I would say another aspect is around assessments. Very common practice in recruitment and makes complete sense. I actually always frame it in more of a positive way for the candidate, because most assessments you're getting to display more softer skills as well as just kind of knowledge. You get to show your presentation skills, your critical thinking, your problem solving. So there's definitely a need for those to be in processes. But we also need to recognize that, there can be potential disadvantages for neurodiverse candidates within assessments. Do you know what I mean? And, a more maybe potential inclusive way for companies to consider this would be, submitting samples of previous work. So in addition to assessments, generally allowing people to show what their best work actually looks like rather than doing it in the way that we expect it to be done. And I think the other aspect is interviews themselves. So, we rely very heavily on social cues, such as body language and eye contact and communication skills. And while there's a certain degree of necessity, I think interviewers will do well, or recruiters do well, to focus on specific skills needed for the job. Yes. And best practice to allow those neurodiverse candidates to see the questions in advance of the interview. Because if you consider, getting the questions ahead of time is an advantage, but only in the way that you're actually going to set that person up for success. And it works for everyone. It means that you're a hiring manager who's incredibly busy, who you're having to take time out of their diary to meet the person that you've assessed. At least they're getting a better quality interview as a result. And it allows people to prepare and create examples and use their STAR method and, really consider what it is that they can do. And it goes back to that idea of neurodiversity. It's no one size fits all approach. You know what I mean? And so there's several areas, I think, in recruitment that we have a high degree of opportunity to really recruit neurodiverse talent and better engage and support neurodiverse talent and enable the business to really leverage untapped talent pools that could have been traditionally overlooked.
Yeah. And I imagine especially with you now working in tech, that tech likes neurodiverse talent because some of the jobs suit it.
Well, I suppose if I look towards kind of other tech companies that, have very much been leading the way in terms of, recruiting neurodiverse talent, and I'm all for it. I think as well, you need to look at it consistently through the lens of kind of equality and D&I.
Yes.
What you don't want to create is an environment of token hiring, which is where sometimes you can get these pockets, where where we know there's high degree of strengths that do exist within certain neuro minorities. We can't over-index on it because you have to allow a person to be a total person and then allow them to, flourish the skills and work in the environment that suits them. It goes back to that life cycle piece.
Right.
Of, not stilting development as a result of it. So because someone is an excellent coder, that's not all they can do. They just need the environment to be adjusted for them.
Yes, that makes sense.
While I completely agree, and again, I will advocate and continue to advocate for that, I would always approach that with a level of caution, because it could end up, in a more difficult situation.
Yes, you are right. Actually, my own career works that way. But you are that you get to a point where you are really good at the technical bit of it, but you want to grow into the leadership role. Yes,
and it's about enabling people to leverage those strengths in their way, and then it's only through continuous conversations like this and this continuous awareness. I mean, look at even in my own example, 15 years is a long time, but a completely different experience in how this was communicated. So as I'm a mother, my son is 4, and he is also neurodivergent.
Okay.
So I'm so hopeful for the future that what is the next 15 years for him going to look like? You know what I mean? Will these even be new topics by the time he gets into the workforce? And that's another strong motivator for me around this subject. Yeah,
definitely. It's interesting. And I think you say conversations like this open people up to hearing different stories and how things work. And it can be really easy. And I've heard other people say, like, pick a neurodiversity could be really good at coding, for example. But actually, that person also may want to grow a career in a corporation where they might want to be director of that department one day. So they don't want to just sit in coding forever in a day. But then there are other people who that's all they've ever wanted to do in life, and you just leave them.
And it really comes down to like how we look at any personal development. It's down to what that person's goals are. It's the organization's responsibility to enable that as much as they can. And I think that understanding and awareness is a key to potentially unlocking that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the more the understanding awareness comes out, hopefully the better we unlock everything for everybody, and that includes people who are neurotypical as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start winding the podcast up now, and at the end of every episode, there are 3 rapid fire questions from me. They don't necessarily need rapid fire answers from you, so feel free to take as long as you want. Some people look at me like deer in the head, like, rapid fire, hang on. So let's dive into the first question now. So question number 1, what prejudice have you had about dyslexia that has been proven wrong?
What prejudice have I had?
Yes.
I won't say who it was, but I had someone through my college experience tell me, is that not something you just grow out of?
Like a pair of boots.
Like a pair of boots, Matthew. It's not something you just grow out of. No, sorry. And nor should I, because it is not something I have. It's who I am, was my answer.
Wow, that's the most ignorant thing I've heard so far. Normally, you don't look like a dyslexic, but that takes it to a whole new level.
That does definitely. Yeah, no, I have to say that was interesting, and that was through the context of sharing with that person that I was, and that was their response. But that's fine. Do you know what I mean? Every day is a school day for some people.
It is indeed. And some people need more school days than others. Okay, so second question from the rapid fire list. If an alien landed and you asked you what dyslexia was like, how would you describe it to them?
Ooh, that's a good question. If I had to describe dyslexia to an alien that landed here, I would say that if you were going to spend your time here meeting various different types of humans, the likelihood of you not meeting a dyslexic person would be nearly zero.
Okay.
As it's 1 to 10 globally in terms of statistics, and 15 to 20% of humans have some form of specialism. So I don't think I would explain it to them exactly in terms of that. It's odd. It's actually probably more common than I think most people actually realize. And you know, again, we have to consider that like only two thirds of the human population are average null measures of neurocognitive ability, and therefore, you know, we have to consider that this some form of specialism is going to be in everyone that you meet. And I think that's what I would tell them. I'd be like, well, congratulations. You know, if you meet 10 people, you're going to meet one of me. And we're fantastic. We come with a high degree of strengths that can be applied across many different forms.
Oh dear. Yes, definitely. Cool. Okay, and final question of the podcast from me. Seeing as this is called the Dyslexia Life Hack Show, what is your favorite dyslexia life hack?
I'd say definitely around the emails aspect. So read aloud, I would say, you know, identify all of the areas that you need support in and put supports in place. So whether that be through software, through read aloud technology, adjusting kind of various sort of lenses, like anything that you need to do to put those support structures and strategies in place is to do it. And to anyone who might be listening who may suspect that they could be dyslexic, I would highly encourage being assessed.
Yes.
It's the greatest gift that you'll ever get, because you will then be able to put these structures in place, and you'll be amazed at what you will achieve as a result of it.
Yes, most definitely. And I think assessed and find people who are positive about dyslexia afterwards is always a great way of putting lots of things in place, I think. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, just thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to chat to you this evening, and it's a subject that I'm never short on conversation around. My colleagues can certainly attest to that. But no, it's been a pleasure, and I think the more content that's out there, the more we can, you know, educate and raise awareness, and really just frame this through this neuroaffirmative lens, the longer impact we're going to have as a society. So thank you.
No, thank you. And thank you very much for taking the time to come on and talk to me this evening. You actually opened my eyes to some of the bits in the recruitment process that I hadn't thought of before. So that's always nice to learn some new things while I'm doing this podcast recording. Cool. Well, I want to thank you again for taking the time to come on, and I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen. And I will speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye.